Imagine for a moment a world without art, without dance, opera, literature, poetry. That world would be a very, very dull place.
Today on the show, I have a real treat for all of you. We have Tom Cook, one of the animators that made my childhood. He has had an extensive career working on a wide range of animated shows in the 80s and 90s, including Heathcliff, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy Doo, Super Friends, Thundarr the Barbarian, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, She-Ra, Princess of Power. And he has transitioned into animating movies as well, as he worked on Jetsons the movie, Rover Dangerfeild, We're Back, a Dinosaur Story, and then he returned to TV working as a director on King of the Hill, Duckman, The Extreme Ghostbusters, and Godzilla the series. And most prestigiously, he worked on the Emmy Award-winning Garfield special, Babes and Bullets. Tom, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, you're welcome.
You know, I have to say, I feel extremely blessed to be able to talk with you because earlier in the year, I got a chance to sit down and interview Roby Gorin, who is he actually worked on a writer or as a writer on a lot of the same shows that you had a chance to work on. So I got to have a glimpse inside the writer's room a little bit and what they did in there. And now I get to look at the opposite end of the spectrum and see what you guys did over with the heavy lifting.
Now, who was it you talked to?
Roby Gorin.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It broke up just as you said the name, so I couldn't hear what you said.
Yeah. It was, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm a writer as well, so I love to talk with other writers and kind of, talk about their process. But, I mean, you guys, what I love about animation is that it's almost like the perfect blend between art and science, because even though, you guys are animating and creating these artistic characters, there's still such a technical prowess that's needed to be able to make good animation.
Yeah, no, that's very true. In fact, when it comes to you see the background panning and the characters are running and everything through the scene,
Yeah.
there's you have to move the background like an eighth of an inch every single drawing, and you have to slow into that and slow out of it, and so it's really you had to have a little bit of a background in math to be able to figure all that stuff out. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Just being able to figure out the vector space and how to calculate that. And particularly in the early days when you guys were doing it, you really didn't have the aid of computers, and I just find it amazing what your generation of animators was able to do because you had half the tools that animators today have doing 2D, and your stuff looked 10 times better than a lot of the animation coming out on kid shows today.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the problem is that a lot of the work back in 1981 was sent over to Korea and Japan, and now it's even in Thailand and Vietnam. So there are really no TV series that are done, or very few that are done here in the United States. So the quality drops down just because of that.
Man, that is a shame that we've even outsourced the arts overseas.
Yeah. It happened to me. I was only in the industry from 1978, and by 1981, every stinking studio except for Filmation sent the work out of the country.
Really?
Yep.
Man,
People don't realize that.
Yeah, I wasn't too familiar with that either. So I guess, when was that one of the reasons why you think like Don Bluth and them, kind of broke from Disney and started their own company, tried to keep jobs in the United States?
Well, yeah, as Don Bluth went over to Ireland.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it really had just to do with the greedy people in the studio wanting to make more money.
Yeah.
And Lou Scheimer, who was the head of Filmation, wasn't one of those greedy guys. And he said, we're going to keep the work here because this is an American art form. And we're going to do so. When we did He-Man and She-Ra and Filmation Ghostbusters and Brave Star,
Hmm.
those were all done here in the United States, and everything else was all done overseas.
Wow. Wow. So you guys really have like, I don't know, kind of a tradition, or you had a tradition going with Filmation to where they, kept things, they kept things American, and they kept things, with a, I don't know, a sense of national pride.
Well, and I wish that they would have made a bigger deal out of it back then, but it was kind of new, to outsource work like that.
Yeah.
And our union, the Motion Picture Screen Cartoonist Guild, was just saying they wanted to like double our salaries. And I said, we don't want to double our salaries. We're getting paid good enough right now. We need to make sure they don't send the work overseas, is what they were threatening. And the union said, nope, we're gonna go on strike and we're gonna demand more money. And I said, well, what good is making $50 an hour if you don't work any hours?
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. They just said up yours and sent the work overseas. And like I said, I'd only had about 3 years in the business, and I would have been out of a career if it wasn't for Lou Scheimer and Filmation.
So I guess, I mean, when you were first getting started, then, well, I guess we'll even take it back a little bit further than that. I mean, when you were a kid, what made you want to get into animation? Was there any particular character that you resonated with, or was it like a certain experience you remember?
Well, I always liked animation. I always liked the cartoons. Like I was born in 1952, so in 1957, that's when Hanna-Barbera started their own studio because they were, of course, working at MGM doing all those great Tom and Jerry's.
Right.
But when the motion picture cartoons ceased to be able to be made because nobody wanted to spend that much money on a cartoon that was only going to be a 10-minute thing before a regular movie, they realized they had to change and make things cheaper. And that's why they did the limited animation that they came up with. And of course, the Flintstones, proved that it didn't matter if it was unbelievably great animation as long as it was a good story.
Right.
And but as a kid, I grew up with all those. I'm the very first Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and most people don't even know that it existed. But the first TV cartoon was called Rough and Ready, and it was a little cat and a little dog, or a big dog and a little cat, and the dog sounded just like Huckleberry Hound because he had exactly the same voice.
Hmm.
And then when Huckleberry Hound hit, I think they didn't release the Rough and Readies just because people would be confused because it was exactly the same voice. And Huck was so popular, they just kind of let Rough and Ready kind of go by the wayside.
Right.
But, I grew up when it was like Beanie and Cecil. A lot of people don't even know who that is anymore. That was Bob Clampett, the creator of Bugs Bunny. He had a puppet show that he used to do in Los Angeles, and he made it into a cartoon series. And I was about 8 years old when that came out, and I loved it. But I never really wanted to get into animation because I wouldn't even know where to start to even try. What I liked was comic books.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and I was about 1960, 61 when Spider-Man came out. And a friend of mine and I were camping in the backyard. We set up the tent out in the backyard and we're watching or reading comic books by flashlight. And he pulls out this Spider-Man #4, and my jaw just dropped. It was like, wow, I love this. So I traded him most of my comics for that one comic.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's kind of what got me interested in learning how to draw. So I would just take the comic and look at a good pose and then kind of draw it on my own. And that's what got me interested in drawing. And it wasn't until, fast forward 15 years, and I was working as a bus driver in Los Angeles. I was a transit bus driver. And my route used to take me right by Hanna-Barbera Studios every day. I'd go by there 5 or 6 times. And I always wanted to go in there just to tour the place because, of course, this was where all my cartoons that I grew up with, were made. And one day I was off and I sat down to eat lunch, and I had just gotten back from going out to check the mail. And it was just a bunch of junk mail that I usually just come in the door and throw it right in the trash. And for some reason this day, I put it on my kitchen table. So when I'm sitting there eating my sandwich, I see this little pamphlet, and it was a college extension course pamphlet that was talking about the different classes they were going to have in the local college for the summertime. And as I'm flipping through this book, not looking for anything, and all of a sudden I saw this comic book class. And we were going to make a comic book, and it was going to be taught by a guy named Don Rico, who used to draw Captain America back in the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as a fan, I just wanted to take the class to meet the teacher.
Right.
And of course, I wanted to learn more about the comic book process too, because I didn't know much about it. So I joined up with the class, and after the first week, we brought in our portfolios, and my portfolio was all Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, all the superheroes. And after the class, he said, "Hey, Tom, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I thought, man, how am I in trouble already? It's only the first day, and I'm getting talked to by the teacher. Well, he said, "I work at Hanna-Barbera as a storyboard artist, and we're doing something called Challenge of the Super Friends. And we need people that can draw superheroes because we have a lot of people who can animate Scooby-Doo and Fred Flintstone, but they're not really good with their human figure. Would I be interested if he recommended me to a class that they teach at the studio every Thursday night? It's free, and you have to be recommended by someone at the studio." And I was like, my gosh, yes, of course. I would love to do that. And then, so I took the class, and 3 weeks into it, I get hired out of the class. So I get hired at Hanna-Barbera, having never worked in animation. I wouldn't have even known how to apply for a job because I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
But they were willing to train me, on the fly as we were learning. So I just sat with an animator, and I was his assistant. And I happen to have here, because of my great preparation.
Oh, wow.
That is the first drawing I ever did at Hanna-Barbera.
Wow. That is one.
I had them put it on a cell for me, and then they gave me a background. The background really doesn't go with this scene.
Right.
But it still worked. It's just out in the backyard jumping around.
Yeah. That is one happy Fred Flintstone.
Yeah, so he just inherited like $1 million or something, so he's all happy. But yeah, so I took my first drawing I ever did right down to ink and paint. I said, "Can you put this on a cell and paint it for me?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Because I'll keep this the rest of my life." And of course, here we are, 40 something years later, and still have it.
Man. Okay, so I got to ask you, just because I also write comics. I write for Tango Comics, so I'm a huge nerd when it comes to that. Primarily a big Silver Age nerd, and I love Spider-Man as well, so I got to ask you, which artist did you like, or did you prefer, John Romita Sr. or Steve Ditko?
No question. Steve Ditko.
Oh, yes.
He's the one that made he's the one that made the character up. He's the one that designed that costume. Now, I think that John Romita Sr. did a really good job when he took over.
Oh, yeah.
But he didn't draw Spider-Man as good as Ditko did. What he did do is he drew the girls much better. Ditko wasn't really very good with the regular characters, but boy, his Spider-Man was so spidery and just loose, and so he was terrific. And I actually, I guess it was about 2 years ago, I was at the New York Comic-Con, and I went down to his studio and waited for him to come out of the elevator.
Really?
And introduced myself to him. And we talked for like maybe 5 minutes. But I just told him, I said, "Look, Mr. Ditko, I had this incredible animation career, and it's all because of Spider-Man. That's what made me want to draw." So he was like, "Well, I had influences in me when I was a kid, so I understand exactly what you're saying." And he said, "I'm so glad that I was your inspiration." And he shook my hand. And then he was heading out to breakfast. And I said, "Hey, can I treat you to breakfast?" And he goes, "No, thank you." And turns and walks off.
Oh.
But I had to meet him because I've met Stan Lee many, many times. And I worked with Jack Kirby on Thundarr the Barbarian. And those were really the three guys that really influenced my career more than anybody else. But being that it was Spider-Man, I said, man, I have got to meet Steve Ditko. I know you're never going to see him at Comic-Con.
Yeah.
And so I forced myself to go there. And then I talked to the people down in the lobby. And I said, this is what I'm going to do. I said, I don't want to, what do you think? Is he going to get mad at me or anything like that? And they said, no, he's not going to get mad at you. I didn't really believe him. So I talked to Neil Adams the night before. And he said, no. He said, Steve is a really nice man. He says, you're not going to get him mad. Because the last thing I wanted to do was to go down and get him mad at me and have him yelling at me as I walk away.
Yeah.
And and the guys in the lobby said, yeah, he's really quiet. And we didn't even realize he was as involved with Spider-Man as he was. But we'll let you, go ahead. You just stay in the lobby until he comes down. So, it was a dream come true. And then later on, I went out and bought on eBay. Somebody had written him a letter. And it's just funny because he would write back saying, I can't autograph anything for anybody because if I do, I have to do it for everybody.
Right.
Regards, Steve Ditko. And he signs the letter. And what's funny is not only does he sign the letter, but he does it in handwriting. And you can read it really good. His handwriting is really good. But underneath, he prints Steve Ditko. Like as if you couldn't read it.
Yeah.
So you get like 2 autographs, for nothing. And yet he's telling you he can't autograph anything. So I bought one of those. It cost me like $300, but I said, I don't care. I've got to have it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing I loved about Steve Ditko is he always had those really big panels that were just action-packed, and the way he would bring flow to a page and how the panels moved. I mean, he would almost, the way he would angle those panels, it almost gave you like a 360 shot of the entire area that they were in. So, like, it really filled up space in your mind.
Yeah, and if you ever saw the Amazing Spider-Man annual #1, where he has each one of the Sinister Six gets a big splash page.
Yeah.
And those are just the nicest drawings that he's ever done. I mean, they're just beautiful. And like I said, I think that he wasn't technically as good as John Romita Sr. He was so good at attitude and angle that his Spider-Man was just untouchable, and nobody can do Spider-Man as good as it was done back then.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know, I feel like, when Ditko was drawing Spider-Man, it was the exact art style that you needed when you were launching that book because it was big, It was bold, it was different. And by the time Romita came around, the book had just progressed, right? It was more focused on characters. It was more focused on, themes, relationships, so his style just fit better with that incarnation of Spider-Man or what the series would progress in.
He's supposed to be a gangly teenager. And when Romita took over, he made him look too much like he's a really well-fit man.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be kind of skinny in a book.
Yeah.
That's what he looked like when Ditko did him. Even in his uniform, he looked like that. But Ditko, the reason that, because I didn't think anybody could replace Ditko. And I think Romita did a really good job. I mean, really, if you had to have somebody come on behind him, and the reason he did is exactly like you said, it became more focused on some of the girls that he was dating.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, his Mary Jane and his Gwen Stacy were just beautiful.
Yeah, his Gwen Stacy was phenomenal. I love those.
Oh,
I love the highlights on the eyes. Just made him pop,
Yeah. Since he had worked in romance comics, he was really good at drawing beautiful women. And, Ditko's women just weren't beautiful. They just weren't. Even the ones that he took his time to draw, they just weren't beautiful. But the difference is that Stan Lee gave Spider-Man to Kirby, and Kirby came back, and it looks like Kirby, and that doesn't look like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
So he said, Stan was smart enough to realize, no, we need a different style for this. All the books, Avengers, Fantastic Four, everything looks like Kirby. But Spider-Man was different. and it had to look different. And I mean, it was the perfect pick.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I don't know, Spider Man. I mean, there's a reason why he is the most recognizable and still, merchandising wise, the most popular superhero. Is that because he's just so relatable, right? He's
Yeah,
always the down and out guy. He's always the person we want to be, because no matter how he messes up his relationships, no matter, what date he misses, what rent check bounces, whatever the case may be, he's always going to face that adversity with a sense of courage, and he's always going to do the right
yeah,
thing, even if it's sacrificing what he wants the most.
yeah. And for me, I was a little, 8 or 9 year old kid that was very shy, and could
Same.
never talk to girls in my class. And so, I mean, it just completely related with me, and so I just fell in love with it. And I loved all the Marvel comics. I was a DC fan up until Marvel came out. And then I saw how much better Marvel was written than DC. Everything was kind of funky in DC,
Yeah.
uh, the imaginary stories of Superman and Lois is always, oh look, Superman turned into a lion. It was just kind of like more fantasy stuff and not really realistic. And all of a sudden you've got Spider-Man and he's living in Queens, and he's swinging across the Triborough Bridge in New York. And I grew up in New York, so I knew all of these places that he was
Yeah.
going to. And so it was just so much more relatable. I've never been to Metropolis and I've never seen Gotham City, but I know New York. And so Marvel really, really did it for me. And of course, it became just huge. I mean, it just blew DC out of the water once they could use, because DC was the owner of the company that was distributing the comics to stores.
Hmm.
So they would only allow Marvel to have 8 comics per month.
Really?
Yeah, they would limit them.
I did
And it was,
not know that.
yeah, yeah. So finally, what happened was DC got sold and they sold their distributorship. And that's when all of a sudden Marvel went out and they started putting out like 30 titles because they could finally compete.
Yeah.
But it's hard to compete when you can only have 8 titles.
So how long? So how long before this, or well, when was this, and how long before like Diamond came around and really just took it over? Like,
Yeah,
was that a company that came later on, or was that, or did it kind of fill that gap that was left after DC got out of the market?
yeah. They're one of the ones that came in after DC came out of the market, I believe. And I think it was almost like late 60s. So it had been almost a good 10 years of having low distribution. And in fact, I just read a book. I have a friend of mine, met him at Comic Cons. I go to a lot of Comic Cons.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you've heard of Danny Fingeroth.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay, Danny Fingeroth was an editor at Marvel for like 18 years.
yeah.
And we got to be very good friends. And he just wrote a book about Stan Lee. And if you want to read a book about Stan Lee, he gets into everything. I mean, the whole how Marvel began, the problems that Stan had with some of the people. I mean, it's really, really, really good book. It just came out a few months ago,
Oh, well,
and
actually, I'd probably have to reach out to
they,
him. I'd love to talk to him about that because I don't know. I had the privilege of meeting Stan Lee twice, and the first time I met him, he was just so full of the energy of his fans, like he had that way of connecting with
right,
people that, even if you were a complete stranger and you only got to meet him for, 30 seconds, he went out of his way to make you feel special. And,
yeah,
there's just something about Stanley. And the first time I met him, I went up and I shook his hand and, I gave him, the usual fan thanks for everything. But I looked him straight in the eye and I tickled his palm with my finger and I gave him the tickler. And he looked at me and he gave it back and he's like, "Woo, Excelsior. I haven't had one of those since San Francisco." And, I just started cracking up because, he's
yeah,
already got those zingers ready. Uh,
yeah,
but I guess kind of going forward, so Super Friends was then the next, or your first real job that you would have working with
Right.
Filmation. So, being such a Marvel fan, I guess what kind of flavor did you want to bring to that DC property?
Yeah, it was difficult because really in my whole life I never got to work on Marvel.
Hmm.
I worked on a lot of DC stuff and Shazam, which is also now DC. Um, but I didn't care because I liked Batman. I mean, Batman was probably my favorite DC character.
Yeah, as he is
Uh,
mostly.
I I love Superman except for the fact that he's so undefeatable that it's really hard to do a good story about.
Yeah.
If they had kept him like back in the 40s when they did the Fleischer cartoons, where he had to struggle to open up a metal door.
Oh, yeah.
Right now he just kind of flicks his finger and the door flies open. So they made him too strong, and it was really hard to get a good story that made you feel like he was in any sort of peril. With Batman, he had no superpowers, so he was just a man that happened to be a really good detective and could almost like CSI, find a hair and go to the Bat Cave and analyze it and figure out who was involved. So I like that much more. And so yeah, so and of course I showed you my first drawing was of Fred Flintstone. Now remember they hired me to do Super Friends, and the first thing I do is Fred. But that's just because they had 2 or 3 series they were doing all at the same time, and they just didn't have any Super Friends stuff ready when I got my first scenes. But I did a number of really good scenes with Batman in that Challenge of the Super Friends. So I was just sitting there going, I'm working on Batman. Just had to pinch myself.
So when you were working on Super Friends, you said that was where you had the opportunity to work with Jack Kirby. What was it like working with him?
Well, it was on Thundarr the Barbarian.
Okay. I got crossed over
Yeah.
there.
And what happened was I forget what I was working on, but my seat was right near the window, and I looked outside and I saw somebody walking across the bridge. They had this bridge that went between the two buildings, and I kind of did a double take, and it was like, oh my gosh, that's Jack Kirby. I had no idea he even worked at the studio.
Yeah.
I found out he'd been doing presentation work for quite a while. Well, I didn't even know that. So I just ran out to where the bridge is and kind of walked over and pretended I had to go to the other side of the building.
Yeah.
And so I could go, oh my gosh, Jack Kirby. And so he was really nice. He had this big, huge portfolio. Everything he did was gigantic. So he had like these, 36-inch by 24-inch portfolio that he was carrying. And he put it down and we talked for about 20 minutes. And at the end of the thing, he goes, here. And he writes down his phone number and his address. And he says, come on, give me a call and come on out to the house sometime.
That
How
has
can I
got to
be
be
this lucky?
surreal.
Yeah, it was crazy. And he had, he passed away like, I think it was 94.
Hmm.
And I had a little teeny address book that I kept in my wallet up until the point that you didn't need to carry an address book. You had a phone.
Right.
But I mean, I had that thing in my wallet for like 20 years, and I would always pull it out and just go, look whose number I've got. So, but really just a super nice guy. And like I said, Steve Ditko was really nice. Jack Kirby was over the top nice. I mean, how many people give you their address and phone number
Yeah.
when they don't even know who you are?
Yeah.
And,
First time meeting you.
And with Stan, I'd met him many, many times because doing the Comic Cons, one of the cons I did was Wizard World, and he was at every Wizard World show for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And but I had to do like everybody else. I had to get in line, and they shove you through there in 30 seconds, and that's it. But I was doing this LA Comic Con about 2 or 3 years ago, the year before he passed away. And the girl that ran the Comic Con, I contacted her and said, look, I'd like to come to your Comic Con. I worked on He-Man and She-Ra. Well, she's this huge She-Ra fan. So she goes, and so we talked on the phone because she wanted to kind of talk to me, about Shira. So
Yeah.
I said, yeah. I said, and same thing. How'd you get started and everything? And I brought up Stan Lee. She said, well, I had dinner with Stan Lee last night because it's Stan Lee's Kamikaze is the LA Comic Con.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, so what I want you to do is I want you to bring some things for Stan to sign, and I'll set it up so you have some time with Stan.
Wow.
So I get there and I brought maybe 10 things from the sign, including a typewritten letter that Jack Kirby had sent me. I want to get Stan to sign that.
Yeah.
I had Don Rico, my teacher, he drew me a Captain America, and I had Stan sign that. And I had done a recreation of X-Men #1 comic cover, a full size, Silver Age size, all in color.
Okay.
And I had him sign that for me. And so Friday goes by, nothing. Saturday goes by, nothing. Sunday morning comes, and I'm thinking she must have just forgotten, So I'm not going to worry about it. And all of a sudden she comes pulling up in a golf cart, and she goes, get in. And we drive over, and she opens up this door, and there's Stan sitting there. And she goes, you got 25 minutes. So for 25 minutes, got to sit there and talk to Stan. I told him all about being out, reading the comics by flashlight. I said, I used to draw characters and I would send it to Marvel, and you would always respond back to me, and they would send you a pinup of the Fantastic Four or Spider-Man in the mail. So I was constantly getting these things saying, hey, Tom, that was a great character. Thanks a lot. So as a kid, you really felt like part of the club.
Yeah, yeah.
That's one thing Marvel really had going for it. You really felt like you were part of the Marvel family.
Well, I mean, like, even with, like, just the way Stan through the comics, whether it's, like, little segments or, narrative bubbles, like, he would just, it was almost as if he would talk to you directly through the comics,
Yeah.
right? It just made it feel so individualized.
Yeah. It was like somebody was sitting down and telling you the story instead of just subtitles.
Right, right.
Yeah,
when I was a kid, I always saw Stan Lee as, like, Walt Disney, but cool. You know what I mean? So I guess
Walt Disney without all the Nazi stuff.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, they're still trying to keep that stuff locked away in the vault. So I guess let me ask you, when you were a kid then, and you would like send those sketches and that over to Marvel, let me ask you, do you remember any of the little characters that you came up with? Because when I was a kid first trying to draw comics, I would create so many different characters and little backstories and stuff like that.
Right. Oh yeah. I remember one character that called the Glider.
Okay.
And what he had is just like Falcon has. The Falcon has those things under his arms.
Yeah.
I came up with that. This was not the Falcon didn't exist yet. So I had a guy that could dive off of buildings and glide around the city.
Yeah.
And another character I did was called the Gladiator. And it was before the Daredevil villain Gladiator came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, I'm thinking I gave them an idea. My character didn't look anything like theirs, but I still think the name was something I came up with as a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think, obviously they looked at him because they replied to me. I'm sure that Flo Steinberg was the one that wrote me the letter back. She was his secretary. And so it was just so cool to be able to draw these things and send them in and know that somebody wasn't just throwing them in the trash.
Yeah.
And it was just awesome. It was just such a great part of my childhood. And my parents were always supportive of buying the comics and stuff. But when I got a little bit older, it was like, boy, you're wasting a lot of time on these cartoons. What the heck are you going to do with these cartoons when you get older? And then when I finally got the job at Hanna-Barbera and I told my dad, he was like, oh, that's what you're going to do. So yeah, it was a real good a real good time to be 26 years old and tell your dad, guess where I'm working, Dad?
26 and I've already made it.
Yeah.
Oh,
So it was because my dad was an airline pilot and he wanted me to be an airline pilot. And I just had no interest. I
yeah.
just didn't want to do that.
Well, I mean, and I mean, it's good. It's just good. So good you had parents that were supportive of your art because, I think that's one of the things that prevents people from wanting to engage in art, whether it's, doodling, cartooning, painting, whatever the music, whatever the case may be. I feel like
Yeah.
when you're young and you get criticism about it, and you internalize it in a way, it just dissuades you from trying to pursue that level of creativity that we all have in us.
Well, one of the difficulties I always have is that it's it's definitely the number one thing I hear outside of "You drew my childhood," which I hear all the time. Uh, if it's people coming up saying, "How does my son or daughter get into the animation industry?" And it's like they don't know. There is no work. There's no work. Disney, they got rid of all of their animators and they no longer have a studio in Burbank. It's a working studio. So it's really hard to tell people, just there's no work. If you want to do storyboards or something like that, you might be able to get work, but you're going to have to move to LA because that's where the places are.
Yeah.
But if you want to actually do the animation, you can't do it. It's just you can't do it. And so it's rough to tell people that, and then they'll come up and they'll hand you their artwork. It's horrible. They think the parent thinks they know what's good because the kid's so much better than them,
Right.
but they're not good. And it's like you don't want to give this kid a lot of praising because you don't want him to waste his career. You can kind of look when somebody's got a little bit of talent. Okay, yeah, I can see, yeah, go to art school, see where it takes you.
Yeah.
But tell them it's a really difficult. I couldn't get married until after I was out of the business. It was a difficult, you make some money, but it's not year round. And if you're going to do something like a comic book, then you're going to have to be one of the best
Oh,
in
yeah.
the business to get a job. And if you come walking up and your stuff just isn't very good, you're just never going to work. And so that's the toughest part is just telling people that, I just don't see anything there that looks like you're going to be able to make this a career.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, it's that, and it's a different market than it was years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the one benefit that there is that it it gives you a sense of freedom that if you were, coming up as an animator right now, there's nothing preventing you from getting a group together, getting like a, successful YouTube channel going and generating your own money that way. But,
Right.
you have to be able to work within the market as it presents itself. And, if, having an employer with, steady work, good benefits and that, like that's what you're looking for is that stability, then, it might not be the career choice for you.
Right. And yeah, I always tell people that too. I said, look, there's so many other places. I mean, you can self-publish your comic book now. You couldn't do that back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the problem is there's like 8,000 published. I see them at the Comic-Cons all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like 99% of them are just horrible. They're badly written. They're written. They're just not something that you want anybody to read. They go to these deep, dark places and it's not a family oriented thing. And if you want to make some money, you have to market yourself to the masses.
Right.
You're not going to make any money by selling 500 copies of a comic book every month. You're just not going to make enough money doing that. And you need to get somebody where you can sell, 100,000 comics in a month. And to do that self-publishing, almost nobody's ever done that. It just doesn't happen. So it's just, there's the market for it, but you're just never really going to make any money doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're the greatest comic artist in the world, there's people that just can't hit deadlines. So they can't get a job doing that because they can't even get the work done.
Yeah, 100% on that. I always have trouble finding artists that are dependable and consistent and meet their deadlines. I mean, well, I mean,
What I get all the time is, hey, I've got a comic book that I'm doing, and I'd love you to draw it. Oh, okay. Well, how much per page? Well, I can't pay you right now, but when it's a big hit, I'll give you. I said, no. I said, you can't do that. You
no,
have
that's
to
not the
start
way it
out
goes.
saying, I'm going to give you, 200 a page or whatever, whatever the going rate is.
Yeah.
Save your money, because you're going to get some guy that can't draw that's going to do your comic, and it's going to be a piece of crap, and you're not going to make any money. You're better off saving up some money and paying the guy what he's worth, getting it done in a month instead of waiting 2 years for this guy to hit the deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and the guy said, well, I'm willing to give you $10 a page, penciling and inking.
No, that's not even a penciled page.
Yeah, and I said, that's not even a penciled panel. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's crazy. And everybody, oh, my comic's going to be great. How do you know that? Everybody thinks their thing's going to be great.
And, because honestly, I self-publish my comics, and you could tell the difference between the folks who think they're going to make money and the people who publish their comics because they love the medium and they just are fans of it. And you could tell it by the people who they think that, and this is just a delusion with all the indie comic publishers that I've come across and talked to, working tables at cons. They think that their character is going to get picked up by Netflix, or it's going to be merchandise. There's going to be toys. It's going to take off. It's going to be this and that. It's just like no. Don't ever write a comic. Don't ever pay someone thousands of dollars to draw a comic unless it is a story with a character that you intimately want to tell. And if it's a character and it's a story that's that important, you are going to save up and you're going to do it the right way. And you're not going to do it to try and make a profit. You're going to do it because that's your passion.
Right. And if someone sees it and loves it as much as you do, maybe you'll get lucky. But the number of people out of 100 is zero.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so few that you can't even count them. You have to get up to like 1 million people doing it, then maybe one will make it.
Oh yeah, easy.
It's just, it's so difficult. And so that's really one of the toughest things for me, is I don't want to discourage people, but at the same time, like I said, I wanted to have a house and a family and a home and kids, and I couldn't do it. I didn't get married till I was 38.
Yeah.
Because there's no way I could bring a family in and be unemployed for 6 months out of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, then, and looking at like comics as well. I mean, comics, as much as I hate to say it, because they have shaped a good portion of, how I identify myself, my personality, things that mattered to me when I was a kid. Comics is a dying medium. Younger kids, they're not really interested in comics. They'd much rather wait for the movie. That and comics overall, both the big two, they struggle to be able to present their characters in exciting ways, and which is why you have DC and Marvel rebooting everything every 5 years, and there's no sense of consistency like there was in the old days.
And I collected everything from like 1960 up until about 1993.
Mm-hmm.
And I had everything. I had full runs of Thor, full runs of Hulk, full runs of everything. And in the 90s, I had a comic store. In Seattle, I owned a comic store called TC's Comics, and had it for a couple of years. And it was right when Diamond and Capital City were kind of battling to see who was going to be the distributor.
Mm-hmm.
And Capital City went out of business, and that was my distributor. And within a month, I was out of business. I had no distributor. Diamond was too far away, so I had to close my store. But it had gotten to the point where every comic I was carrying was such a pile of crap. You know, it's when they started with all these different covers, and you had to collect 6 different covers.
Yeah, the platinum covers and
die cut covers, and now we're going to kill off every character. So you got the Death of Superman, which was the biggest pile of crap on the earth. And I had people coming into my store just to buy that issue that had never collected comics ever before,
thinking they're going to be millionaires.
I said, this is going to be worth like 50 cents because there's so many comics that they've created, so many that they've printed.
Yeah.
You're wasting your time and money trying to do this. You know, I had one of my fellow comic store owners up in Seattle when they rebooted X-Men with Jim Lee.
Okay.
He bought, now listen to this. He bought 30,000 copies of X-Men #1.
Why? Like, what was it? Like, he really thought it was going to be that big of a book 50 years down the line?
Yeah. And that's what I told him. I said, you're out of your mind. Now, what was his bill that month? Like $35,000. He didn't have $35,000. So he ended up borrowing money from a friend, packing all the comics up and storing them in the guy's garage. And now you can pick them up for $0.25 in the quarter bin. And he ended up dying of a heart attack soon after that because he basically ruined his life.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I can understand, you know, someone gets, you know, super excited about something new, but if you've never collected comics before, why would you throw that big of an investment into something that's such a gamble?
Buy 100 comics, not 30,000.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, look, if you got everybody in Washington State, everybody in Oregon, and everybody in Idaho come to your store to buy their X-Men #1, you'll have 25,000 copies left when you're done. How are you ever going to sell these? You're never, ever going to sell these. And, you know, like I said, he ended up passing away within a year or so.
Wow.
Yeah. So I feel sorry for the guy that lent him the money and then had all these comics in his garage. He's stuck now.
Right. Well, I guess let me ask you, just with, you know, this pandemic and everything.
Where are we sitting time-wise? Can you see a time thing on your?
We are at 47 minutes right now.
Boy, I wonder how they let us go that long. Usually this shuts off at 40.
Yeah, I say we'll just keep it rolling. We'll see if
absolutely.
We'll see if it cuts off or not.
Great.
So I guess let me ask you, just coming from that perspective as a former comic book shop owner, this pandemic has really put Diamond in a vice, and now both Marvel and DC, they're looking at other distribution outfits. Do you think that's going to be a positive or a negative for the comic industry going forward?
Boy, I don't know. I think like what you said, I think the comics are a dying breed. I think that kids of today, they don't like to read, man. They want you to flip on the TV and let them tell you the story.
Exactly.
And I couldn't wait to get home from school to go in my bedroom and read the comics that I just bought. You know, that's all I wanted to do. And so I don't know.
With the big two, you know, kind of losing their prestige, as it were, in comics. You know, they're focused on their animation, they're focused on their TV, they're focused on their movies. Comics has just been put on the back burner, which is unfortunate because that should be their bedrock. But with Diamond kind of, you know, falling out of the scene and the big two kind of losing that momentum, I mean, I feel like comics overall, it's going to evolve, and it's just going to be a niche thing, and independent comics is probably going to be the main avenue by which, you know, people are reading comics, because primarily the market is going to be older folks who who still enjoy the format. So I mean, it's going to be less of a kid friendly thing in the future, which is
Yeah. Well,
which
yeah, that
stinks.
kind
It
of
really
happened.
does.
Yeah, see, the kid friendly thing kind of went out the window when I had my comic store, and we got the first issue of Lobo.
Oh yeah.
And I had one of the kids come into my store with his mom, and I kind of took the mom aside and I said, "You really want to buy this for him?" And she goes, "What's the matter?" And I showed her the comic. I flipped to a couple pages and she goes, "Oh my gosh, I thought comics were kid friendly. And now it's getting so it's not that way anymore." And and you said the biggest thing right there is that you've got Marvel movies that are making billions. Why would you make comic books that make you hundreds of thousands?
Right.
You know, it just it's a dying field, and the comic book artists, they aren't really they're not getting any of the good artists anymore because they have to pay them so much.
Right. Right.
So the good guys like the Jim Lees and the people like that, they give them all the money, and then all the other guys are just getting nothing. And I know a lot of comic artists, and they're really upset by that. And part of it for me is I think the art, and with this computer coloring, everything looks like it's made of plastic because they put so many highlights on everything.
Yeah. There's so
It
many
looks like
layers now.
their uniform is cloth and it looks like plastic. It looks like they have like saran wrap sheeting on them instead of, and their face. There's so many highlights on the face. Um, I just don't like it. It just doesn't look good. I think a lot of the artists that are really good artists are almost too good for comics. I thought that while I like Neil Adams and I liked his work, it was almost too illustration, like it was an adult book
Right.
instead of a little bit more comic booky, like all the other comic artists that we grew up with. And it's kind of gone that way where everything in movies as well, like you get animated movies, it's like, why are they using animation when the background looks like it's a live action background? Just make it a live action movie. It's really expensive to do an animated film.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why the cartoons on TV look so bad, is they found that there's no reason to put good animation in them. The kids don't know the difference.
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, and well, I guess, I mean, just looking at it from that standpoint, like, I mean, really, when I want good anime, or sorry, animation, I mean, I always tend to go towards, adult oriented animation, whether it's anime, whether it's, some of the more psychedelic stuff that's coming out these days, whether it's your Rick and Morty, Super Jail. Actually, have you checked out that show on Netflix, Midnight Gospel, yet?
No.
It's just I mean, it's essentially a podcast that just has a bunch of zany out there animation that's thrown over it. Definitely one of the old Adult Swim animation teams. But like, stuff like that, because it's it's a little oddball and it's just interesting, right?
Uh-huh.
But I guess just to kind of backtrack a little bit. So when you were working with, when you were working after Super Friends, how long was it before you got involved with He-Man and She-Ra?
Yeah, well, Super Friends was 78, and then He-Man started in 82 for the 83 season. So in 82 is when we started drawing it. And we had done, when I moved over to Filmation, because I worked at Hanna-Barbera, then I worked at Ruby Spears, and then I went on to work at Filmation. And at Ruby Spears, we did Plastic Man, Heathcliff,
Mm-hmm.
Rickety Rocket, Fang Face, and did I say Plastic Man? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then when that kind of ended, because that's right when they sent all the work overseas, and I heard that Lou had said that he wouldn't send work overseas, so I went over to Filmation, and I started there. I worked on Tarzan, Flash Gordon, something called Black Star, and then they wanted to do a second season of Black Star, but they wanted to cut the budget on it because it was kind of a lot of special effects.
Yeah.
And so we decided we didn't want to cut the budget. We wanted to make it, as quality as we could. And then that's when He-Man came along. And a normal season is like 13 episodes. So when I worked on Scooby-Doo, it was 13 episodes of Scooby-Doo, 13, And suddenly we found out we were going to be doing 65 episodes of He-Man.
Oh, wow. All at
because
once?
it was going to be on Monday through Friday instead of just Saturday morning. It was the first syndicated show. So you just do the math, 52 weeks, 65 episodes. That's more than an episode a week.
Oh, yeah.
So from that point on, I never got laid off again. So that's where my career got so much better money-wise.
Yeah.
Even later on, they were saying you had a certain number of feet that you had to do a film. A foot is 16 frames. So you had to do 80 feet a week. Well, it got to the point where they said, okay, if you do 160 feet, we'll give you 2 paychecks. So certain weeks you get some scenes and go, wow, these are kind of easy scenes. This is the week I'm going to really focus.
Yeah.
And do the 160 feet and get that double paycheck. So the money was getting really good. And then about that time is when Westinghouse, who owned Filmation, decided they wanted to sell the studio to get some cash. And they sold it to L'Oreal, the makeup company, and they promptly closed the studio.
Wait, why would L'Oreal want to buy a studio?
Well, they didn't want to buy a studio. They wanted to buy our library so they could sell them on VHS.
Oh, so I guess so if you were at He-Man from the very beginning, did you get the opportunity to kind of develop different characters, have input on how those characters looked?
No, any of the characters were already designed first by Mattel, and then they took the Mattel toys and then made them a little simpler to animate. So everything when it comes to an animator is already designed, the story's already written,
Mm-hmm.
the storyboard's done, the voices are done. So it's up to us. We are basically the actor. We listen to the voice and determine what we think the character should be doing. So that's why every scene depends on who you gave it to, what it's going to look like as far as the acting.
Yeah.
Because everybody has a different idea. It would be like giving the same script to Marlon Brando and Tom Cruise and then say they should be exactly the same. No, they're going to be completely different, even with the same lines and the same storyline. So same thing with an animator. You're going to have a different idea how this is going to look.
So what sort? I guess did you have more of an input then on like settings, different kinds of props, stuff like that? I mean, I know that Mattel probably had like guns and swords and stuff, but I mean like as far as like other different types of locations or side characters, did you get a chance to kind of put anything on there?
Every single thing is already designed.
Wow.
So if He-Man is going to, pick up a rock and throw it, the rock is designed and painted in the background department. And, you just, you've got, I mean, the whole episode has to be just completely locked down and not allow other people to put their input into it, because you got 60 animators. They're all going to do something different.
Yeah.
And it's if he's picking up a rock and you say, okay, now next scene, he throws the rock, Well, it's got to be the same rock. It can't be a different rock. And if
Right.
somebody else did that scene and I did this scene, you can't paint it a different color. It's got to be painted the same color. You even have to hook up the scenes. So if I have the scene where he lifts the rock over his head from a long shot, and then they go to a close up and he throws it,
Mm-hmm.
he's got to have exactly the same pose in the very first frame so that they hook up. Otherwise, it's going to look weird that it jumps to all of a sudden he's holding it with his wrong hand or something. So it's all perfectly plotted out, everything.
Yeah. And now, when you guys plot it out, is that something that you guys would, do as a team, or is that something that you would just do off the storyboards that were provided?
Yeah, well, the storyboards would then become a layout. And there was a layout department. So they would take each one of those little storyboards and blow that up to the size you're going to work at. And they would usually draw a couple of possible poses.
Yeah.
So if He-Man was going to, pick up a rock, you'd have him there like this over the rock and then have him leaning down to the rock and then holding the rock up. Now, we didn't have to use those poses. We could do whatever we wanted. But a lot of times we were in so much of a hurry that if that pose was good, we would use it. And then you could animate in and out of those poses.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're a layout artist, you really don't know animation. You don't know how to animate. So a lot of times those poses aren't really usable.
Right.
So the animator has to take those and do his own pose of that. But if you found that they were usable, then you would just go ahead and use them, because that's going to save you, 20 minutes of doing a drawing. And you're trying to make that deadline, and get that footage.
Right. Right. Wow. So you guys had to have been cranking episodes out left and right. So I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess, which one did you prefer then? Animating for TV shows where there was just like a lot of pressure and consistency, or animating in movies where you just kind of had that, I wouldn't say you probably had extra time. I'm sure you still had your deadlines, but I mean, was there a difference in environments really?
Well, the biggest difference was that if you worked on a movie, the animation was always better.
Yeah.
You could take your time and really make things move. With TV, it's like you'd get like maybe 20 or 25 scenes, and you'd pick one or two to do a super nice job on, and the rest of them you just cranked them out.
Right. Right.
Because a lot of it was all designed through our stock system, because all the work was sent overseas, and their budgets were probably like $100,000 an episode. Well, our budgets were like $250,000 an episode. So in order to get our budgets down to where we could compete with the Japanese and the Koreans, we came up with a stock system. And that's why you see characters running all the time, because they would run through the scene and the other character run through. Well, those scenes were already drawn.
Yeah.
We had all these stock scenes, so that if character ran through the scene, the camera would just take that. They'd have a different background, but he'd just put it and shoot those, and we didn't have to draw it again. So 25% of every episode was reused animation. And it wasn't that we were lazy, it's just that we had to get the budget lower.
Right, right. And it's not even like, just reusing backgrounds as they're walking by. I mean, you're just creating entire sequences that you can catalog and then utilize when needed.
Yeah. And the difference was that now he's walking in the Grayskull Castle, and now they're indoors, so you just have a different painted background.
Mm-hmm.
And that way you get a whole new scene and a whole whatever. But while they're storyboarding, they're making sure that, okay, I'm going to have him walk here. I'll use this stock scene where it's a long shot of him, or I'm going to use this close up, and then he's going to walk in and stop. So I'll cut to a close up, and you'll have him walk in like this and just turn towards the camera or whatever, and that's already done. So you just have to basically expose the scene in an exposure sheet, which is putting down the numbers how you want them to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for the cameraman to be able to put the correct cells on at the right time. And so obviously doing a movie was much better, just because you had so much more time to really do. And most animators want to make something look really nice.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's your craft.
Yeah, but at the same time, it wasn't that bad working on the TV shows either, because the work was not as hard.
Right.
We had to do it faster, but it wasn't as hard. Animating something in a movie is, it's doing it 5 or 6 times before you get it right.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, particularly if you look at like what you did on, was it We're Back, a Dinosaur Story? Just like that final climax when they're in the, or even when they first introduced that I forget the name of the carnival, but the carnival scene where they have I don't know, all the different special effects and that going on. There's so much movement in those scenes. There's so much going on that, I mean, it really just goes to show the attention to detail you guys paid on it.
Yeah, and the thing is, because Filmation used to get a lot of crap about using the stock system because they thought we were just lazy. And I kept telling people, I said, if we don't do the stock system, we're out of business.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is the last TV studio. So it's not like we weren't capable of doing really, really good animation, because most of the people that worked at Filmation, when Filmation closed, they went over and worked at Disney and worked on Little Mermaid and worked on Beauty and the Beast. So, I mean, these were all talented people.
Yeah.
But when you have a year to do something as opposed to a week, it's going to be a big difference in quality. And people sometimes didn't understand that.
So, well, I guess let me ask you. So, what was the first movie that you had worked on? Was it a Scooby Doo VHS release, or?
Yeah, I did. Scooby Goes to Hollywood. Yeah, that was the first one that I did. It was one of the Scooby movies. And at one point, Scooby turns into like the Fonz.
Mm-hmm.
Got the leather jacket and, all that stuff. And they called him the Groove because, of course, they couldn't call him the Fonz.
Right.
But there's a sequence where he does that. And I did most of that sequence. So if you ever watch that cartoon, and sometimes I'll find copies of it for sale on Walmart. So I'll buy a bunch of copies up and take them to cons with me. And then that way the people could buy them and get them autographed.
Yeah.
And then they'll know exactly what I did in the show. So that's kind of cool.
So I guess movie-wise then, after Scooby-Doo and then, your work at Filmation, then you were brought back to Hanna-Barbera for the Jetsons movie, correct?
Yeah, I did that freelance. That was after Filmation closed. Well, no, I think I was working at Filmation when I worked on that. But Hanna-Barbera put out, feelers that they needed some animators for the Jetson movie. And being a kid, I loved the Jetsons in '63 when it came out. I was only 11. So to get to work on the Jetsons, because I'd worked on the Flintstones, so I wanted to work on the Jetsons. So I got to work on that. And I was just an assistant animator on the Fred and Barney show, but I got to be an animator on the Jetson movie. And same thing with that. Walmart will have it for $5.
Yeah. So
I'll buy like 15 copies and take them to the shows with me, and then people get a chance to buy them and get them autographed. And but those are movies that, even those movies, we got to animate better. We also did a Brave Star feature, and we animated better, but it's still, we had to get it done like in a month. So
right.
It wasn't like, but when I got to work on We're Back or Thumbelina or Rover Dangerfield, these are the movies that were like, a couple years in production.
Yeah.
And it made it much better stress-wise. Instead of the 80 feet a week, you had to do like maybe 10. So it was a lot easier that way. And plus, like I said, you're looking on better quality stuff.
So you had done a few movies, and then you took a step back from animation. You said you ran your small business. I guess what made you want to get back into it years later?
Well, I had actually moved up to Seattle in 1989, and I was still doing some animation work through the mail.
Okay.
They'd FedEx the work to me, and I'd FedEx it back. And then I ended up getting a job at Microsoft. And so I didn't have to worry about cartoon animation anymore. But then I was doing computer animation. But Microsoft came up with the very first animation program for a computer called Softimage.
Mm-hmm.
And they purchased it from a smaller company and then kind of expounded on that. And they said, well, we don't know what we're going to use this for, but we need to get somebody that's an animator that can learn, because we don't even know what the software is. We don't know what a in-between is. We don't, there's nobody there that knows anything about animation.
Yeah, yeah.
So they had hired me to kind of show them about animation. So I was one of the very first people to ever work in that program.
Oh, wow.
They sent me down to LA, and this is probably about 1996, 95, something like that. In fact, Windows 95 just came out when I got the job at Microsoft. So that's about right, 95, 96. And so I was learning how to do stuff in a computer, which was completely foreign to me because, of course, I didn't even know how to use computers.
Right.
Nobody really did. And I kept telling my friends that were working at Disney, you better learn the computer because this is going to take it over. I'm telling you. Nobody listened to me, so they all got laid off at Disney. And so I ended up doing video games and stuff like that at Microsoft.
Yeah.
I actually was going around to different cities and training companies how to animate in a computer, because you'd have a bunch of kids that knew how to use the computer so good, but didn't know how to animate anything. They didn't know all of the tricks and techniques that you would use, that instead of drawing, you would have to do it in the computer.
Right.
So that was kind of cool to be able to do that. But then I had a friend of mine got a job, a part-time job at Microsoft, and he contacted me and said, hey, I used to work in the animation business in LA too. I do directing work for the studios down there, and I can use some help. I can get as much work as I want. And he said, what I'll do is I'll get the work for us, and then I'll take, like, if you get $3 a foot, I'll take like 10 cents out of each $3. So you'll get $2.90 a foot. And that way I'll help you get the work. You'll make a lot of easy money, and I'll still get a little cut off of that. So I said, okay. So that's why I got into the direction thing. And it was really lucrative. I mean, you could make $100 an hour.
Right.
Just sitting at your kitchen table, in the mid 90s. So it was really great. And then a few people caught wind of me doing direction, and Sony TriStar. I did a few episodes for Sony TriStar, and they liked. It was weird because the sheets that we used, I have one right here. All right. This sheet here is called an exposure sheet. Everything you see on there,
Yeah.
that's the storyboard. They paste it in the corner there so you know what the scene's going to be like.
Okay.
All the numbers and everything there, that's the different cells. So this one is from the TV show Black Star, and it shows that there's going to be four levels of cells. You can see where the numbers are.
Yeah, yeah.
And so those are the cells. One of them might be his head, one might be his body, his eyes, whatever, but they're all on a different cell. Well, the director, and this one, of course, there's not much direction on it, but the director uses this side over here, and he writes what he wants the animator to do.
Ah.
Telling the animator, just like you would tell the actor.
Yeah.
You'd have a bullhorn and say, hey, I want you to walk in really slowly, kind of look dejected, and then when you see something, go, whoa, and so you're directing the guy, right? Well, for us, you would just write that over here.
Right.
Walks in slowly, sees something, gets a surprised look on him, and then you might draw a little thumbnail of what you want his eyes to look like if you want him really super surprised.
Yeah.
That's how you direct a cartoon. And so that's what we had to do. Well, all of these numbers and stuff, I have really good handwriting. And I would do all these little arrows, and I put little shadows under the arrow. So when people would see my work, they were like, wow, this looks really, I mean, this is a stupid exposure sheet and this looks really good.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were using my sheets to train other people how to do direction work. It wasn't that my direction was unbelievable. It's just that my sheets looked so beautiful. You know, plus, I mean, the direction work, it's not really that difficult if you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
But so I got a call from them saying, you know, your sheets are so beautiful. We're using your sheets to train everybody how to direct. Because sometimes, like a doctor doing a prescription, the director would write so sloppily you couldn't read what they were doing. And now they have to take that and translate it into like Korean, so the Korean animators know what you wrote down.
Yeah.
Well, if they can't read what you wrote down, how can they possibly turn it into Korean so they can understand?
So then, so after you got in directing, what were some of the first few projects you had a chance to direct? Was it, this would have been like late 90s, so King of the Hill, Duckman, were those some of the first ones?
Yeah, well, Duckman was one of the first ones. But things like Savage Dragon,
Oh,
the comic book.
oh, I didn't know
They
you
did
did the
Savage
Savage
Dragon.
Dragon cartoon. That was a great one.
Yeah, I got to work on that. I did. There was a Godzilla made after the movie.
Yeah, the one with
Okay,
Matthew
hold on
Broderick.
one second. My daughter's asked me what I want for dinner.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, just give me a double cheeseburger and a Diet Coke and fries. Okay. All right. Yeah. And then I also worked on a kids show called PB&J Otter. It was great because my daughter watched that, so it
Yeah.
was really fun to work on something and say, "Hey, Daddy did this." And I did something called Road Rovers, which was a bunch of dogs that kind of were half man, half dog.
Mm-hmm.
That was on right about the time that Pinky and the Brain was on, because it
Okay.
was like that show was on, and then Pinky and the Brain was after it.
I love Pinky and the Brain.
And then in a bunch of stuff where they would just be like one shots. It's like, here we have an episode of this. I did Heat Seekers. I don't even know what it is. And then Extreme Dinosaurs, Extreme Ghostbusters. I mean, it was just a bunch of different things. And that was a lot from this guy in Seattle. He would just get whatever, you know, and he'd say, here, take this episode. I'll take this episode. And then the stuff that I got on my own was the King of the Hill and the Duckman. And then also I did one episode of The Simpsons. Don't ask me which one, but I did one.
So,
And
uh-huh.
yeah, and if you ever saw King of the Hill, there was an episode in the first season where Bobby gets caught smoking.
Oh, and he makes him smoke the whole pack?
I did that episode.
Oh, I love that episode. Oh, and I don't know, that one's great because just how quick he falls back into smoking, you know. So
Yeah. And that one was I found out it was one of the more popular episodes.
oh, definitely.
And so when I would talk about it at the cons, you know, everybody go, "Oh my gosh, that's the best episode!" And it was a show that hadn't been on the air yet. So when I got the thing in the mail, it was all like, I said, "Man, this is like Beavis and Butthead. This is drawn so poorly." But just listening to the cassette of the voice tracks, it was so funny. I said, "Boy, this has got a good chance of being a big hit."
Yeah, and well, I mean, I don't know. That's the one thing I love about King of the Hill is that as time's gone on, I feel it's become more relevant because, I mean, if it's one thing our divided political spectrum needs right now, it's the wisdom of Hank Hill because he's just the most level-headed common man that you can come across on TV. Like everything he says is always just so reasonable, you know?
Yeah, and he's a good dad. He's a good husband, and yet he's still got his quirks. You know, he's got these crazy friends. Yeah, what I wanted to just show you is that I'm on one of these King of the Hill Facebook pages.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, when they found out I directed episodes and everything, so I did a couple of commissions for people.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then people were asking, hey, can you do me as Hank Hill? And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. So that's, that looks just like the guy.
Yeah.
And there was even a black guy that wanted me to do it for him. So there's this black Hank Hill guy.
Oh, that's
And
funny.
then I also do commissions for people. So that's what's been keeping me busy is I go out to the Facebook pages and I say, anybody want a commission? So here's a Skeletor I just did.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I
And
love
then
the
on
details.
I belong to a Masters of the Universe page, and I do every Saturday. I do a coloring. I do one of my drawings, and I color it on camera.
Okay.
And this is the one I did this last weekend of Shira.
Oh, wow.
So, and then I also have a battle cat that I did the weekend before. So it's kind of fun, and the people are all, they love that I worked on the show, and so that way they get a chance to ask all these great questions. And they'll be talking about stuff, and I'll just chime in because nope, that's not true. This is what that is, and they love having me out there because it really helps them hone in on what the truth was.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I
Yeah,
mean, I don't know. There's just something about primarily my generation with nostalgia as well. Like, I mean, definitely more than like, Gen X or your generation. Millennials and what is it, Gen Z, the next one after it. But millennials in particular are just so obsessed with the things that they loved when they were kids that they just want to
yeah,
know more about it, more background.
yeah. What are the kids that are like 45? What are they called?
I think those would still be. I think that'd still be Gen X, right?
Okay, yeah, because those are the people that's the age. If you're in your early 40s, you grew up with He-Man,
Yeah,
and man, I mean, I do very good business at these cons, and everybody wants to meet me and talk to me, and it's like I'm no big deal. There were like 60 of us, it was not a big deal,
right.
but that I'm one of the last remaining. I'm 68 this May 23rd. So a lot of the people that I worked with, they passed away 20 years ago,
Hmm.
and there's not many of us around. So to actually meet somebody that actually worked on the drawings and everything else, uh, that's what I wanted to meet. I
Yeah,
wish they had Comic Cons when I was a kid, so I could have met some of the people that I wanted to meet. And so I understand when they want to meet me, but it's just really weird that it's me.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I'm
yeah.
saying? It's really weird because my kids are like, you're just our stupid dad. You know? I said, yeah, but they think I'm important.
Well, I mean, but I mean, it's also like it's almost like a moment frozen in time too, because animation nowadays it's so different than what it
Yeah,
was, and there's not as much skill and
yeah,
craftsmanship put into animation these days that like what you guys were doing in when you actually had the painted backgrounds and you had the different cells. I mean, it was probably the pinnacle of what 2D animation would be in like, the early to mid 90s. And then, I mean, really, it just kind of fell by the wayside and it's
yeah.
going off. And, there's just something about that 2D animation that just still looks better than a
Yeah.
lot of the
Well,
stuff that's getting put out today.
the whole thing about computer animation, even the 2D computer animation, is you no longer have to be an artist to
Yeah.
be an animator, and that's what's hurting. It's allowed a lot more people to get into the business, but a lot less talented people are in the business
Yeah, it's
now.
very true.
I always say it's like the American Idol TV show. Now you don't even have to play the piano. You can make the computer play it for you. If you can't sing well, who cares? Just fix it in auto tune.
Yeah.
So it's made a whole lot of people be able to make their own albums, but they suck. And if they try to sing live, they can't sing live. And so I mean, imagine this is what I always say. I said, imagine American Idol 1960, and Bob Dylan walks in, and gives his audition and goes, "He, Mr. Tambourine." They would laugh him out of the studio,
Yeah.
and there would be no Bob Dylan. But Bob Dylan is so much better than anybody that's been on American Idol as far as talent.
100%.
So you're taking a lot more people and allowing them to have access to the business, but they're much less talented and they're getting paid much more money. I mean, these people are making so much money, it's ridiculous. And they don't have any talent.
Yeah, it's just more a technical prowess at that point.
Yes. Yes. And that's the same thing with animation. And it's nothing against the people. I mean, this is what it is. But if you told them, go ahead and draw me something, they couldn't do it because someone else models the character for them and they're just moving their arms and you're like a little puppet master.
Yeah.
And it's still, there's a talent to making it move real, but it's not the same as not only having to make it move real, but also having to draw it at this really weird angle. I remember that was the thing. I would get a character and I would animate something and I could just put the camera wherever I wanted so that if it was a down shot of something walking by, it's really difficult to draw that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. You just move the camera over there and you got it. So it's kind of a cheating way to get stuff to look really cool without having to work hard.
Huh. Well, I guess we are getting to the end of the program. So there's always one thing I always ask anybody who works a con. What is the weirdest request you have ever gotten, whether it's commission or otherwise?
Oh, man. Well, I get the typical. I mean, in this one, I've had probably 5 or 6 times is, can you draw me a naked Jessica Rabbit? Because I worked on Roger Rabbit. And I said, look, I said, number one, that's just not me.
Right.
I'm not gonna do that. Okay. Number two, if I did do it, you would put it on Facebook. Some Disney guy would see it, and I would get a phone call from them saying, "Stop drawing Jessica Rabbit."
Yeah, Disney's
And
quick about that too.
I can't jeopardize myself by doing something like that. The whole idea is that you want a character that you love. Let me draw it like you love them.
Yeah.
You know, not naked. It's just kind of weird to even think of doing that. I understand a couple reasons why you want it, but to me, that's still really weird.
They've been dabbling in watercolors.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's probably the weirdest.
So since you worked on Roger Rabbit, I got to ask, what was the different? Well, I guess how was it different? Doing animation over live action film as opposed to over like traditional cells.
Well, the trick was that when you're doing it on regular cells, you're animating on the piece of paper, and whatever you've got there's a background that's going to match up with it. In live action, the background is in the camera. And not just in the camera, but it's in the movie camera.
Right.
So they had to take every frame of that film and blow it up to the size you were going to work at. Because if the camera's moving, then the door on the car is constantly changing angles because the camera's moving in 3D.
Yeah, yeah.
In 2D, you wouldn't do that. You would just have the car move either sideways, or if you did it and drew it, in perspective, then you could just follow what your perspective was and change the character to fit that. Well, we had to have every blow up of every film so that we could match up the character. Because if Roger reaches for the doorknob of a car,
mm-hmm.
he has to stay holding on to that. So we need each, as the car door turns in his hands there, We need to be sure where the car door is so that his hand stays in that same spot.
Wow.
So that was really tricky. And then we also had to take, and they would tell you what side the sun was on. And then we would go in and we would draw the shadows on each character. And in between the shadows, and we used Sharpie and we just darkened them in with Sharpie. And then they would diffuse that. And that's what made them so look like they were in the shadow. And so it looked very realistic. It was a really, really good way to do this. But you'd end up sitting there all day long smelling Sharpie. So boy, it was pretty rough on the sinus.
Get lightheaded real quick.
Yeah. And but it really, really worked. And it was really fun to learn how they were doing that. You know, it was I didn't work on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I worked on Tummy Trouble, which was one of the shorts.
Okay.
And because Roger Rabbit had already been in the movie theater. But when they said they were going to do a short, we were just ecstatic because I loved Roger Rabbit.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to be able to work on that. And then I actually did a show with Charles Fleischer, the voice of Roger Rabbit. And somebody had asked me to do Jessica and Roger for him.
Mm-hmm.
I did a nice drawing for him, all in color and everything. And I didn't realize he was going to take it over and get it autographed by Charlie too. So next thing I know, Charlie Fleischer is standing at my table and he says, "Dude, that is the nicest Roger Rabbit and Jessica I have ever seen." And I said, "Well, you know, thank you." And he says, "I'm serious." He says, "I've had other artists do it and they're close, but they can't quite get it like you do." And I said, "Well, look, the guy that I used to work for when we did Roger Rabbit used to work at Disney. And he was an incredible animator. And he did such a good Roger Rabbit." I said, I just did what he did. You know, I took his style." And he said, "Yeah, but you have to be able to draw that style." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm telling you, it's because he's so good that I'm so good." You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, I couldn't have done that on my own if I didn't have the guidance of this genius. His name was Dale Bear. Just a wonderful guy. And one of the best animators I'd ever worked for.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today, Tom. Definitely, well, this is the point of the show where I would usually ask you to plug whatever con appearances, but unfortunately, that won't be the case this season. So, if folks do want to reach out and get a commission piece from you, what's the best social media handle they can reach out to you at?
Well, if they go out to Facebook at Tom Cook Classic TV Animator, and usually if you put Tom Cook Animator, I usually pop up.
Mm-hmm.
You can message me from there, and that's probably the best way to do it. And you know that you talk about the, well, I can tell you all the cons that were canceled that I was going to be at.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure when they're going to start up again. I assume they will, but we had one that I thought we were going to do in June, and they just canceled and postponed it till the end of the year. But I'm sure at some point. But if they log on and go to Facebook, Tom Cook Animator, and become one of my friends and follow me, I always announce what cons I'm going to, and so that way they could either get a commission there or they can wait and meet me at the show.
Awesome. Well, then, folks, definitely go ahead, reach out to him on social media if you'd like to get a commission in the meantime. But definitely give him a follow, give him a like, subscribe. Check out. That's a nice one.
Sorceress.
But definitely give him a like, subscribe. Check out what cons he's going to be at. Definitely stop by, say hi at his table. And, folks, in this era of uncertainty, with a lot of the things being up, down, side to side, we don't really know what's right. Remember that cartoons and the things you grow up with, they are comforting to you. And as you seek comfort and as you isolate yourself, definitely recognize the potential and the power you have in this time to help others, to reach out, to be there for each other. Even if it's just saying hi to someone who's isolated, might be feeling lonely, reach out to the people you love. Because, like Spider Man and Uncle Ben would say, with great power comes great responsibility. And in this time, I want everyone to utilize what brings you comfort in life and share it with everyone around you. Good night, folks.
That's the perfect way to end it.